Welcome into the LSU Insider Podcast for Thursday, October the 17th. I'm Zach Ewing with advocate columnist Scott Rabalais and our LSU, baseball and football beat writer. We'll call you Koki Riley.
A man for all seasons.
That's right.
Koki
That's right.
Riley.
That's what they call me. Yep.
When the weather is cold. No, the weather's cold in February when baseball starts too, isn't it? So we can't say that.
Yeah, it's not quite a weather thing.
But there's a chill in the air. It's most definitely football season. LSU plays Arkansas up in Fayetteville on Saturday. What's the weather up there like, Rab? What are you packing?
It's nice and during the day, 70s in the day, 40s at night.
See, that is perfect football weather. Though,
yeah,
to me.
it looks pretty perfect because usually when you go up there, it's ice station zebra. When you go up there,
well, they go up there in November a lot of the time.
But October is nice.
Yeah.
And how nice it is for me to do two podcasts this week to do with Koki. This is for me, the Sweet Life with Zach and Koki.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm not sure if that's the nicest compliment I've ever received or not, but we'll take it. Today's show is brought to you by Waste Pro. Tiger fans, if you're planning a tailgate or event, keep your guests comfortable with portable toilets from Waste Pro. Call 225-744-6400 and mention the LSU Sports Insider for a special offer. So we're going to get rolling. We got our LSU Arkansas preview podcast. The reason Rab's pulling double duty this week, by the way, is because Reed Darcy is up in Birmingham for SEC basketball media days, men's and women's side. So we're going to get some basketball talk in here. Maybe as early as next week. It's coming. It's coming.
The LSU women's first exhibition game is in about 10 days or so. So it's not too far away.
So we'll ask Reed about his Birmingham experience next week when he's back. But for right now, we're all football still. LSU at Arkansas. It's 6 p.m. Saturday night. It's on ESPN, and this is just sort of your classic trap game. You had the huge win over Ole Miss last week. If you're LSU, you looking forward to that trip to Texas A&M, who's 3-0 in the SEC, and they've got Mississippi State this week, so most likely 4-0 in the SEC. Turns into just a huge game. We talk, everybody had Ole Miss and Alabama circled. That Texas A&M game might be the biggest game of the season, but LSU's got to win this week to make it so.
Pretty much. This is this 4-game stretch that they're in that we said is going to define their season, right? Ole Miss, road trips to Arkansas and A&M, Alabama on the back end. It's in over 5 weeks. They got the first win, so that was big. I think, and we can delve into this more. If LSU can go 2-1 in these next 3 games, win 2 out of 3, then your favorite in the 3 games you play after Alabama, at Florida, Vanderbilt, and Oklahoma, LSU will be favored in all those games. If you can hold serve in those games, then you're in the playoff hunt, which is about what all you could hope for this season. Will they be in it? Will they not? I don't know. I know Heather Dinich from ESPN right now has LSU in the playoff, but they're on that fringe. They're in the receiving consideration kind of
11
thing.
or 10. Yeah.
Well, they're ranked 8th, so you'd think, they should be in the playoff right now.
It's big, and you're right. It is a trap game. This used to be a trap game that LSU would play after playing Alabama, an emotional, physical game, and now it's coming after an emotional, physical game against Ole Miss. So it's a very similar situation for LSU, especially going on the road. Always tough to play there. Usually the weather's really, really bad. This time it's going to be should be pretty nice football weather, but they'll be amped up. I mean, they beat Tennessee last time out, so they're looking for back-to-back wins over a top 10 team.
And on the other side, Arkansas coming off a bye, Koki.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rab will remember the game to just to build off what you said. But Rab will remember the game 2 years ago when they had the historic win against Alabama here in Tiger Stadium, overtime. Mason Taylor scores a 2-point conversion, and then you're going all the way up to Arkansas in the snow, basically. Remember all the snow that was on the ground in Fayetteville?
They were blowing it off the field or something like that.
Yeah, it was like a December game in New England. It was crazy. And Harold Perkins was playing sick, and he still had that amazing game, and they ended up winning. And I think you're going to get better weather in this game, but this is going to be a night game, and the crowd's going to be more into it than the game 2 years ago. So you get a little bit of that trade-off there. And Arkansas, I think this is probably a better Arkansas team now than the team that they saw 2 years ago, and especially the team that they saw last year. Given that Taylon Green's such an explosive athlete who can make plays with his arms and with his legs. Arm, not arms. That'd be kind of wild if they had to switch quarterback.
Ambidextrous quarterback.
Yeah. That'd be pretty interesting. Cool. Yeah, the Urangelo Siente of quarterbacks. That's a college baseball reference for you.
Seattle Mariner.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, first round pick. Yeah, but we're getting really far afield right now. either way, like I think Taylor Green's a major upgrade for them at quarterback, even after they lost KJ Jefferson to UCF in the portal. I think that they have some very underrated weapons on the outside of this team. They got a really good running game going. Their offensive line's better than it was last season. The defense is very sound. I'll get into it more in detail as we get later into the podcast, but this is not going to be an easy game. This is a really good team, and I mean, I almost ranked them in my poll this past week because I just think that they've had a pretty tough schedule. They have a very impressive win against Tennessee, and when you watch them play, if you watch them at the right time, they look like a top 10 team sometimes. But the problem is for them is that that's not always the case. I mean, a lot of penalties, a lot of turnovers, some ugly plays, some ugly stretches for them. So consistency is kind of the key for them, which is kind of interesting because we've talked about that with LSU a little bit this year too.
Yeah. I mean, Arkansas could be 6-0. I mean, they lost an double overtime game to Oklahoma State, lost to Texas A&M by 4 points in the game. They also had the lead in briefly. They just kind of found a way to lose those games and then found a way to beat Tennessee. And Sam Pittman, probably lucky to keep his job last year. I mean, I think a lot of people thought he was going to be fired. He keeps his job. He brings in Bobby Petrino, which was a risky move because you have the former head coach at Arkansas now kind of looking over your shoulder and calling the plays. And so far, it's worked. So we'll see if it continues to work against LSU, if Arkansas can come up with another big win, or if LSU keeps rolling with its 6th straight. We're going to break the game down. First, we got to take a commercial break. We'll be back right after this.
There's no better place to parlay than Caesars Sportsbook. Parlay Builder gives you all the game day action from all across the league. Multiple games, legs, and props, all in one spot. It's so quick and easy, you can keep your focus on the games and your nachos. Or if you're focusing on one game, remember, you can place your same game parlays live during the action. Caesars Sportsbook, the only sportsbook app with Caesars rewards.
Experience the convenience and cleanliness that Waste Pro brings to Mardi Gras, LSU tailgates, and festivals with our top-notch portable toilet services. Perfect for large crowds and community events. Join the countless satisfied families and organizers who trust Waste Pro to keep their gatherings spotless and sanitary. Discover more about our services and make your next event a success at wasteprousa.com.
No, it's not so long. All right, welcome back to the LSU Sports Insider podcast. Breaking down LSU versus Arkansas. Today's injury report, which is brought to you by Baton Rouge Clinic. We talked last week about how thin LSU was at wide receiver. Chris Hilton was out again. C.J. Daniels was out, and then they also lost Kyron Lacey briefly during the game, and he came back. It looks like
Kyle Parker before the game,
and Kyle Parker also out. Yeah,
for the season,
and Parker, he's out for the season. But it does look like they'll get C.J. Daniels back, and possibly, I mean, at this point, we got to actually see him suit up there for a real play. But Chris Hilton could be back this week too.
Yeah, I mean, as of a couple weeks ago, he was warming up to play in a game. I think it was before the UCLA game, I want to say, and it just seemed like he was on the cusp of coming back, and then he was a game time decision, and he just didn't play. And really, ever since then, it seems like he's only gone backwards, and that's really unfortunate because I mean I think LSU was really counting on him to help stretch the field for them this season and use that speed, and sometimes it feels like they need that in the offense. And the first half against Ole Miss, it really felt like that. So obviously, it would be great to have him back, but I'm not 100% sure if that's going to be the case this week. But as you said, also like C.J. Daniels looks like he's gonna return, and that's very helpful for a wide receiver room that's kind of suddenly like losing its depth, not because of personnel, but mostly because of just injuries.
Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it, when Chris Hilton plays. Hopefully he does for his sake, and it certainly would benefit LSU's offense in the ways Koki described. Excuse me, Koki. But
I'm sure that's never happened before.
No, never happened to him. But I don't think LSU would be talking about moving Trey'Dez Green to wide receiver if they expected to get a big contribution from Chris Hilton anytime soon. And Brian Kelly talked about that at his Monday press conference this week. Yeah, Trey'Dez is 6'7". He's a freshman, so you got to wonder how much he knows about playing wide receiver. But he caught a touchdown pass against Ole Miss, so they need to get him more on the field. I think he's a great potential target for Garrett Nussmeier. So I think that shows that. I don't think anybody's banking on Chris Hilton getting out there and making 5 catches against Arkansas.
He has 3 catches and 2 of them were touchdowns. That's
talking about Trey'Dez Green.
Trey'Dez Green.
Yeah. Chris Hilton has a stress fracture. Have y'all ever had a stress fracture? Like, I've had one in my foot, and it is the most frustrating thing because you think you're fine, and you're walking around. And they say, okay, well, I think I'm going to go. If I normally jog for 3 miles, I'm going to go try just a mile and see how it feels, and then it hurts like hell the next day. And then you're back through. You have to let it completely heal, and it's hard to know when it's completely healed because if you don't do anything on it, it feels fine. It feels like it is healed, and so I can kind of see where this is coming from. With Chris Hilton, especially at a position like that where you're making sharp cuts on that foot and you're putting a lot of weight on it. I mean, I can see where the frustration comes from, but I can also see where Chris Hilton comes from. I do wonder if he's visited the Baton Rouge Clinic. Injury report is brought to you by the Baton Rouge Clinic. Maybe you've seen your daughter, Rab.
Maybe so. My pediatrician daughter. Yeah, she might.
Pediatrician.
She couldn't tell me if she did, though.
Too old for that. Yeah. Patient-doctor confidentiality. They are your trusted healthcare provider in the heart of Baton Rouge. Whether you're in need of primary care, specialist services, or urgent care, the Baton Rouge Clinic has you covered with a team of dedicated and experienced professionals. Visit BatonRougeClinic.com to learn more or to schedule your appointment today. The Baton Rouge Clinic, caring for generations. All right, as we start our breakdown here, when LSU has the ball, they won the game last week. Everything is great from that perspective. Koki, they still couldn't run the ball. Now, Ole Miss has one of the nation's best run defenses. LSU, did enough, obviously, to win the game, but this has now been 7 weeks of us saying LSU needs to run the ball better. Arkansas is not shabby. I think they're 28th in the country in rushing yards allowed per game. So also a pretty good run D. Is this just who LSU is at this point?
It's hard to say for certain because we have seen moments where they have run the ball well, and South Carolina's a pretty decent run defense, and they were able to run the ball pretty well against them. And obviously there was the big South Alabama game, but again, no offense to South Alabama, that's not an SEC team. But as for Ole Miss, I think it's not just Ole Miss is a good run defense. They have the best run defense in the country statistically. So that's something that I wish I kind of knew about heading into this game, and it kind of would have helped put the game into the better context as to why what happened. But knowing that after the fact makes me think that, I think there's at least a better chance of running the ball better in a game like this against Arkansas, where they have a good run defense, like you said. I think they're 5th in the SEC in yards per game allowed on the ground, but they're not quite at the level of Ole Miss. So, and again, we know they don't have quite the same level of athletes that Ole Miss had in the front seven. Walter Nolan's been one of the best defensive tackles in the country this season, and he was probably a big reason as to why a lot of those holes, especially in the interior, weren't really opening up. And I wrote a story about all the run game troubles, especially when it relates to the Ole Miss game, for a story that's up on theadvocate.com right now. And one of the points of that piece was Brian Kelly talking about just how their running game struggles wasn't just like one thing here, one thing there. It was just a whole host of different issues, whether it was not getting into the right run call on a certain down, whether it was not getting the right crack to open up a certain hole, whether it was the running back not, finding the right hole at the right time. So the fact that it was a host of issues makes me think that, the opponent definitely had something to do with it. But it also makes me believe that, this team still has work to do in terms of getting that timing down and just getting better at blocking, especially in the running game. So it's kind of a mystery in some ways. In some ways, I mean, whether it's opponent or whether the fact that they've already struggled a bit this year, or the fact that we've talked about this a million times, but they're just more predictable on the ground than they were last year because they don't have a Jaden Daniels type of threat running at the quarterback position. I think it's kind of a combination of all these certain things, and it's getting harder and harder every week to figure out which is probably the number one reason.
The good news is, Scott, that I think if you told us in August that LSU would struggle this much running the ball and give us the numbers, we'd say, oh man, that's bad news. The good news is that Garrett Nussmeier has been able to move the ball anyway through the air.
Yeah, no question. I mean, he's averaging over 300 yards passing per game, has thrown for over 300 yards in all but one game so far this year. And for all the struggles that they're having run blocking, they've been tremendous at pass blocking. He's been sacked twice in 6 games. With total pass attempts, Ricky Collins has had a few pass attempts too, and the 2 times he's been sacked, that's 255 pass attempts. So he's been sacked like 0.07 times. Yeah, it's less than 1%, right? Which is tremendous. So that's really good. So it makes you wonder, why are they so meh at run blocking? I think the argument you could make is that in their 2 SEC games, they've played 2 of the very best defensive fronts in the SEC in South Carolina and certainly Ole Miss, but that doesn't explain how they couldn't run against Nickel State, for example. But yeah, they're doing it. They are kind of a one-handed offense. I think, like you said, they don't have Jaden this year. People from Jacob Hester, I listened to the radio call during the game, and of course, former LSU fullback, and announcers and other analysts and stuff. People are crying out for Garrett Nussmeier to run the ball a little more often. And the LSU's longest run from scrimmage against Ole Miss, 14 yards, was his scramble on like 3rd and 13. Yep. Got the first down. He doesn't have to be Jaden. He's not going to be Jaden, obviously. Jaden was a 1,000-yard rusher last year. No one's expecting anything like that, nor should they. That's not his MO. But give him that threat once in a while. Just show it. Just do it. Now, and it makes me wonder, and we'll never know, Koki, is he checking out of sometimes when they maybe called runs because he sees a pass opening? Because a short pass in the flat to Mason Taylor or Josh Williams is as good as a run, right? I mean, really. But they've got to show that threat a little more, because there was that play early in the Ole Miss game or on 4th down where he it was kind of looked like a quarterback, kind of like an RPO kind of thing. And Ole Miss had no concerns that he was going to keep the ball.
That's the Caleb Jackson play, right?
And they dropped Caleb Jackson for like a 3-yard loss. The Ole Miss had no worries.
No one was on the quarterback. No one was assigned to the quarterback on that play.
You got to make them think it a little bit. So obviously you don't want to put Garrett in harm's way, or because he's your franchise.
You'd be in trouble if he got hurt.
Right. I mean, if he gets hurt for a long period of time.
But if there's 8 free yards there and you can slide down without being touched.
Yes, and he's had those opportunities, and he hasn't taken them.
He's really only taken one of them, at least lately, and that was that 14-yard scramble that you mentioned.
But then they did a quarterback sneak against Ole Miss, which we hadn't seen. A
little tush push.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe it's coming a little bit. I think it would help the running game in general if they could do.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned that like this team has a really good passing attack, right? But it's harder to have an efficient passing attack, and we saw this against Ole Miss when you can't run the ball and you can't stay ahead of the sticks at all. This is why we're talking about the running game. We're not talking about the running game in terms of it being the strength of this offense. It's not. It's never going to be the strength of the offense.
It just needs to be a threat.
It just has to be somewhat of a threat. It has to be. They need a decent curveball to pair with their already really good fastball, because teams are going to start teeing off that fastball if they don't have any respect for the curveball, and that's exactly what you saw for 3.5 quarters last week against Ole Miss. And Arkansas doesn't have a bad passing defense, but it is worse than it is the weaker is weaker than their run defense, though. They're 49th in the country in defensive passing efficiency. LSU in comparison is 93rd. So it's a solid pass defense. It's not fantastic though. So that's something just sort of keep in the back of your head as you head into this game. But yeah, and especially and you saw it in the numbers in terms of their lack of efficiency against Ole Miss in the passing game. And on 3rd down, they were 4 of 12 in third down situations through the air. And I mean, part of that's Nussmeier forcing some plays, obviously, but at the same time, 4 of 12 isn't going to get it done.
Yeah, that's the reason I say I think we all would have said they were in trouble if you give us the rushing numbers, simply because it's hard to succeed against good defenses when you're one-dimensional or one-handed, as you put it, Rap. And Arkansas they're not at Ole Miss level. They're a pretty good defense. They don't seem to have a ton of stars, but they're just solid everywhere. I mean, they don't have anybody who has more than, I think, 3 sacks. I'm going to blank on his name. They do have a corner with 3 picks. But nobody has a tremendous amount of tackles. They're just sort of well-rounded.
Yeah, they're well-rounded. Landon Jackson's sort of the star of the defense. He was a former LSU player and then transferred after his freshman year to Arkansas. He's been a 3-year starter there ever since. It's been one of the kind of the heart of the team, honestly. He has 19. He only has 2 sacks, but he's 19 pressures this season. So he's obviously pressuring the quarterback at a pretty consistent rate. So it's going to be a challenge for Emory Jones or Will Campbell, or if they slide him inside to the guards to sort of keep him in check. I think if any offensive line can keep him in check, it's this one. But it's something to definitely keep an eye out for if you want sort of a name. And Nico DeVilliers, their other edge rusher, has 12 pressures this year, so he hasn't been that bad either. So they can get to the quarterback a little bit. But I do think these receivers can get open against the secondary. I mean, their best cornerback, Jalen Braxton's out for this game. That's what they said on Wednesday, yesterday's availability report. So that's something to keep in mind. I mean, they've been playing without him for the last couple of weeks, and they've been okay. But it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out in a game like this when LSU has so many different weapons.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, by the way, we need to get a bell for baseball references. Every time you make a baseball reference, we got to ding the bell.
I like it.
Baseball or Arizona reference.
Arizona State. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Speaking of star players and transfers, our star player segment is proudly sponsored by Waste Pro. Ensure your tailgate or event is a hit with clean and convenient portable toilets from Waste Pro. Rent yours today. And, again, Arkansas is a team that doesn't have a ton of stars. We went with Jaquindon Jackson here. He's a Texas transfer. Team's leading rusher. He does have 10 rushing touchdowns. If you count, he's got about 115 receiving yards, too. He's over 600 yards from scrimmage. Arkansas, again, Bobby Petrino offense, they're going to be creative. There's going to be a lot of eye candy, a lot of misdirection. So he's kind of the main guy you got to keep an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Arkansas does an excellent job of just scouting these running backs. I mean, they have Raheem Sanders for a number of years, and they bring in Jaquindon Jackson, and there's almost no drop off whatsoever, right? So you got to give their Sam Pittman and that program a lot of credit for just finding the next guy and having there be almost no drop off there. So this team's going to run the ball, and they're going to run it well because Bobby Petrino, like as you said, there's a lot of eye candy, but there's just a lot of different types of runs, and it's to the point where Brian Kelly said on Monday that they're not going to be able to prepare for all the different sorts of looks that they present in the running game, all the different types of runs that they have. Like that's how creative they can get. And Bobby Petrino is kind of like the mad scientist of offensive coordinators. So this is definitely going to be a challenge for LSU. It's sort of like how the tempo and the pace was a challenge last week. This week it's going to be more of just the amount of eye candy and the amount of different types of plays and different types of looks that Arkansas is going to throw at them.
That'll transition us into when Arkansas has the ball. Quarterback is Taylon Greenrab, definitely a dual threat guy. He has been very inconsistent. 5 touchdowns, 5 interceptions this year. He's not particularly dangerous in that respect, but all this eye candy we're talking about, misdirection, and LSU has had problems with that this year at times, particularly in the South Carolina game. So they're going to have to be on their P's and Q's.
Yeah, they've taken the bait a number of times on defense, right? And they find themselves out of position, and it leads to giving up big plays. And we saw this against Ole Miss, the 50-yard touchdown run. I think it was Ulysses Bentley last week, 50 yards on 4th and 1, and they were just totally out of position. And Trey Harris could have had a touchdown catch on the first drive, and he just dropped the ball. And they had some other big plays too. So they're going to give some up. And Green is it's a very interesting situation with him. He hurt his knee against Tennessee, their last game out 2 weeks ago. He's been out a lot. Sam Pittman, the Arkansas coach, said on the SEC teleconference Wednesday that he was looking good, but he wouldn't say he was going to play. Just by listening to him, I think Koki might agree.
He was not on Wednesday's injury report, just to be clear. The fact that he wasn't even listed on it means he's probably
almost a quarterback with a knee problem.
I think he's going to play.
Limit him.
But he probably is not going to be as mobile as he normally would be, and it probably will restrict somewhat of what they want to do with him on the ground. So, but I imagine he's going to try to play, and they're going to play him against LSU. But it's such an interesting situation with Arkansas's offense, if I may for a second. When they hired Bobby Petrino, it's like this looks like to borrow a line from Blazing Saddles, the last act of a desperate man, for Sam Pittman, bringing back a former coach, as you said, looking over his shoulder. But it's worked pretty much. And if you told me that Arkansas would be 4-2 at midseason, having lost KJ Jefferson, having lost Rocket Sanders, desperately bringing in Bobby Petrino to come back and kind of resuscitate the offense, and out of a chance to go 5-2 and beat their second straight top 10 team this week was a legitimate chance for them, I would have said no way. But this is one of the beauties of college football. You never know exactly what you're going to get.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I mean, just from a skill position standpoint, they may have had more talent last year, but this year's unit seems to be more cohesive. They make fewer mistakes. And they're probably playing with a better defense, too. So Arkansas, a tough opponent. We are going to move into our keys to the game and predictions. We'll also go around the SEC. First, we're going to take a quick break here on the LSU Sports Insider podcast.
You know how far I've gone. Now I'm home again. I'm feeling more alive these days than I've ever been.
At the Baton Rouge Clinic, our sole focus is to provide exceptional health care for your entire family so that you can get back to doing what you love most. We are caring for generations.
You give me love, give me love.
Since 1988, Classic Industrial Services, Inc. has led the industry in specialty contracting. From thermal insulation to scaffolding, coatings, and beyond, we cover it all. Every minute matters in our commitment to quality and safety. We're here to serve with roofing, siding, heat trace, and refractory services. Visit classicindustrial.com for more information.
All right, so back on the LSU Sports Insider podcast, we're going to do our sports betting segment. It is proudly sponsored by the Queen of Baton Rouge. Experience the thrill of game day at 1717 Kitchen and Cocktails, your premier destination for elevated sports entertainment. Guys, LSU is a 2.5-point favorite with an over-under of 55.5 at DraftKings this week. A couple of other notes, they're plus 130 to make the college football playoff. That means, for those who don't know, a little less than 50-50, probably in the 40 to 45% range is the implied probability there. They're plus 850 to win the SEC. Those odds have gone significantly down, so they're less than a 10-1 shot. Look, we can talk about this week's game, but less than 10-1, there's a reasonable path for them to get there. Again, even if they lose a game in these next three, if they... Rab, you said at the top of the show, if they can go into those last three games in which they will be solid favorites at 4-1 in the SEC, you figure they win those three. 7-1, somebody at 7-1 is getting into the SEC championship game. It's almost impossible for that not to be the case. Now, tiebreakers and all of that, I don't know, but there's a reasonable, and then of course they'd have to win the game, but there's a reasonable path.
Yeah, let's say LSU, if LSU wins this game, it gets 7-1. They beat Arkansas. They
split between A&M and Alabama.
Split between A&M and Alabama, but you'd rather beat. You'd almost rather, if you had to pick, you'd almost rather beat A&M.
That's right.
Especially if Alabama loses to Tennessee on Saturday.
Because that would be the Alabama's second SEC loss.
The second SEC loss, and then they'd have the tiebreaker on you, but it'd be 6-2. So it's plausible for LSU to go 7-1 in conference. And make it to the championship game and probably play Texas. They're certainly in that it certainly looks like Texas, leading the pack, and they're number one in the country, so they are leading the pack. And then this big, cluster of teams right behind them, and LSU is right in that mix. And Ole Miss has dropped to the, with a lot. That's why that game last week was so big. It was somebody's dropping away to the back of that pack. So it's LSU, it's Alabama, it's Georgia, it's Tennessee, it's Texas A&M certainly,
yeah.
and then Arkansas could say, hey, what about us? Because they only have one conference loss too.
Missouri
no, they got a very tough path ahead. They play Missouri. They play Texas. I think they've got 2 or 3 tough games ahead. Arkansas, so they've got a very tough path ahead. So no one's expecting that. But yeah, LSU is they're in about as good a position as you could ask for at this point in the season.
It's still very wide open, right? There's the three undefeated teams. There's Texas, LSU, and Texas A&M undefeated in conference, and they all three. Well, Texas A&M plays both of them, right? They all have games against each other. LSU doesn't play Texas, but you're right, because if you were to split A&M and Alabama, but the loss was to A&M, A&M's at that point would be 5-0 in conference because they play Mississippi State this week. Let's say they get to 4-0, they beat LSU. That's 5-0. They only got 3 games left. One of them is against Texas. But even if you lose that one, they would obviously at 7-1 win a tiebreaker over 7-1 LSU to get into the SEC title game. The other conversation here, Koki, is if you're LSU and you're 10-2. Do you want to be in the SEC championship game? Because if you want to get in the playoff, I don't know if you want to face Texas and pick up that third loss.
Exactly. Yeah. If you, but then you're also asking the question, like, are you really going to not put the SEC, runner-up in the playoff?
It still means something, yeah. And I would think that at 10-2, there's probably a 10-2 team that gets left out somewhere around the country, and you would have an opportunity to go to Atlanta and not only seal a spot in the playoff, but seal your spot in the top 4 by winning that game.
Yeah, and I think if they went 10-2 and missed the SEC championship game, which is a possibility if they lose to A&M, because then A&M,
right,
even if A&M lost to Texas, they'd still get in, right? And it would be funny because then you'd have to have that rematch probably in Atlanta, right? So because Texas and Texas A&M play in the final week,
right?
But again, we're really theorizing here, and college football is very crazy, and I still think that we could definitely see a 2-loss team in the SEC championship game.
Oh yeah,
we don't even know if Texas is going to beat Georgia this week. Like we're getting over our skis here for sure. But and I think like a lot of this is going to come down to what's going on across the country too, not just in the SEC. Like there are 2 undefeated Big 12 teams right now, and I'm not 100% sure that either of them will lose any more than 1 game for the rest of this regular season, just because of the way the rest of that conference is shaken out, and the fact that those 2 teams are, I don't want to say they're heads and shoulders above everybody else, but they're ahead of everybody else for sure. That's BYU and Iowa State. So, and then you have the ACC situation where Clemson's only loss is to Georgia, and Miami keeps on trying to lose, but they win.
And their schedule really softens up. They play Louisville this week, which is a tough game, but
that's a tough game. Yeah,
their schedule really softens up.
So yeah, like again, when we're talking about the playoff and the fact that LSU is more involved in it now than ever before, like I still think if they only lose 1 game from here on out, that they're a 1-loss SEC team, you're going to put that team in. I'm sorry. But even if they do or don't make the SEC championship game, I feel like I wouldn't say that's irrelevant, but I have trouble seeing that not being the case. But if they lose 2 games, then it's...
Yeah, I don't think 9-3. It's so hard to just say you're in at 10-2 and you're out at 9-3 because these things don't happen in a vacuum.
Yeah,
we don't know everything else, as you say, that happens around the SEC, that happens around the country. But right now, at DraftKings, LSU plus 130 to make the playoff. I think minus 150 or minus 160 to miss the playoff if you want to bet on it that way. Tiger fans, you can catch all the sports action at the Queen Casino's DraftKings Sportsbook Bar and 1717 Kitchen and Cocktails. With top-notch screens and live betting, it's the ultimate spot to watch your favorite teams and enjoy a cold brew or signature cocktail. The Queen Casino is the only land-based casino in Baton Rouge and your go-to for game day or any day. Visit today and elevate your sports watching experience. And we kind of started to do it, but we're going to go around the SEC. Today's Around the SEC segment is brought to you by Classic Industrial Services, because at Classic Industrial Services, every minute matters. Big week in the SEC. Big week. I mean, you've got 2 showdowns. You've got Alabama, Tennessee, and you've got Texas and Georgia, obviously. We mentioned this. It is so wide open. Texas looks like they're head and shoulders above everybody. Texas could easily finish with 2 SEC losses. I mean, they play Georgia, they play Texas A&M. They look like they're good enough to avoid dropping both of those games. But those are tough games, man. The A&M game's on the road. It's a rivalry game. We know how good Georgia is. And then you kind of look at the context of this, and after those 3 unbeaten SEC teams, you still have 6 SEC teams with 1 loss. And that goes from your Alabamas and Georgias and Tennessees, who we think are title contenders, down to Missouri, and then down to Arkansas and Vanderbilt. Like, technically any of these teams are still alive, and that's why you've got these undercard games. You've got Auburn, Missouri. You've got Oklahoma, South Carolina. I'm kind of blanking on the rest of the schedule. Kentucky, Florida, but all of these games hold a lot of significance.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit on a lot of them. I mean, Alabama, Tennessee is the other massive game this weekend after Georgia, Texas, obviously. I'd say the LSU Arkansas game is probably the third card if this was like a night at the boxing arena or something.
In the Octagon.
Right? Yeah, the Octagon or whatever. But anyway, you could also argue like Texas has been incredible this season. They've been dominant. They really haven't shown any like real blemishes. They've looked like the best team in the country. But you could also argue that they haven't played a very hard schedule because Michigan's a flawed team, right? Even though that game was in the big house on the road, they can't really throw the ball. And then Oklahoma
is bad.
Oklahoma, similar thing, right?
Oklahoma might be 6-6, guys.
Yeah.
I mean, they're a really good team.
so
But the
coming into the
schedule
year, yeah.
is. I mean, I shouldn't say they're a really good team. They are a solid team. They're a talented team. But that schedule's unforgiving.
And the offense is just almost non-existent, I would say. They don't really have even a strength that you can point to on offense at this point. I mean, they have a tough quarterback situation. A lot of the receivers are still hurt. The offensive line has been poor this season. They really got nothing. They really almost have nothing going for them offensively. And you saw that against Texas. And I think that's something to definitely keep an eye on when they have to face LSU to finish out the season. And that's especially the case of LSU, is really has something to play for potentially in making the college football playoffs. So I say that because we're not. This is going to be the first major test that Texas has faced this season, and even though like the Michigan game and the Oklahoma game were like solid teams and nice warm-ups, they're not Georgia, and that's going to be really interesting to see how it works out. And I mean, they're going to be at home, so that's going to be a big advantage for them. But at the same time, like, it's not easy. It's Georgia. There's a reason why Alabama is the only team, literally the only team that's beaten them in the last 3 years.
Georgia would be an interesting test case for the college football playoff. And is what if they go into Austin and pull the upset? They lose at Ole Miss, and then they play Texas again in the SEC championship game. Somehow they get in at 6-2, and they lose that game, and they're 9-3. They're 10-3. Like, they got a great strength of schedule. So they're probably getting in. So they could be a team. They could be in as 9-3 and maybe get in anyway. But
they could 9-3 or 10-3 be like the number 9 seed and then set up a rematch with a third game against Texas.
Why not?
Yeah. And you have to remember that like the committee's going to count that Clemson game. What if Clemson wins the ACC? Yeah. So you're not going to put them in with their strength of schedule and with that dominant win against the ACC
and
champion.
Your only losses are to Alabama and Texas. Yeah. Interesting. Rab, you said off the air you thought Texas rolls this week.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Georgia's they're not looking as great on defense. They're just not as dominant as they've been. And maybe I'm judging them against what we've seen from Georgia the last 3 seasons or so. But they're just not looking as dominant. I mean, they give 31 points at home to Miss State. Now that's looking ahead, obviously, to this game and all that. And I get it. But because Texas has been so good and Quinn Ewers is back now at quarterback and they're playing at home in Austin, and this is. I just like Texas here, which of course means that Georgia's going to win. Right? I mean,
is Alabama Tennessee an elimination game for the playoff?
Oh yeah, no doubt.
I especially if Tennessee loses. I think if Alabama loses, there's still a path, just because I think their schedule is still pretty tough. Like they had the LSU game. Like if they beat LSU and they win out, then
10-2
they only have
with a win over Georgia,
with a win over Georgia and LSU. That can probably get you in, right? Even with the Vanderbilt loss, because I think the committee. As long as they stay consistent with what they've done in the past, which isn't always the case, obviously. But they value the big wins, right? And they would have 2 of them, especially since the LSU game's on the road. So I don't think Alabama's necessarily eliminated. It just becomes that Alabama LSU game in 3 weeks just becomes like. Like Gladiator 3 or something. Like that would be just absolutely massive for both sides. So.
Obviously, Texas Georgia is the marquee game, but I'm most fascinated by Alabama and Tennessee. Tennessee looked like world beaters to start the season, then they go lose to Arkansas, and their offense has really struggled of late. And then Alabama just they're still talented, but they just seem to have lost their identity. They certainly seem to have lost that cloak of invincibility that they had under Nick Saban, which, I mean, they didn't win every game under Nick Saban, but it just seemed like that. And just, they should have lost to South Carolina. They should have lost to South Carolina.
Yeah.
I mean, they just, let them back in the game and played very poorly, and they lost to. I know Vanderbilt's the talk of the town, and they're going to go to 5-2. They're going to beat Ball State Saturday at home, and they're going to go to 5-2, which is pretty remarkable.
Make a bowl game.
But Alabama shouldn't lose to Vandy. So I don't have a lot of faith in Alabama.
Well, one more note: we're talking about Oklahoma. If they can't beat South Carolina this weekend at home, they're favored by 1.5.
That's all?
Their only remaining home games. Okay, they play Maine, so you figure they're going to get a win there. They have 4 wins. They play Maine, and then their other home games against Alabama. So if they can't beat South Carolina at home this weekend, in order to even make a bowl game, in order to go 6-6, Oklahoma either has to win at Ole Miss, at Missouri, or at LSU.
Oklahoma got a very difficult schedule.
Very difficult.
Yeah.
They just the schedule they were handed this year. They're going to play Texas. Obviously, that game's not going anywhere. The Texas OU game, and LSU and Alabama. And Ole Miss.
Basically, everybody except for Georgia, they got all the toughest games.
Yeah.
Really tough.
It is ridiculous, and like we saw that heading into the season. But I sort of want to piggyback off your Alabama, your lack of faith in Alabama. I don't have a lot of faith in Tennessee.
Fair enough.
They almost lost it at home to Florida. The game went to overtime.
Should have, yeah.
Yeah, they should have lost.
If Graham Mertz doesn't get hurt, they probably lose that game.
Yeah, exactly. And then they lose a game to Arkansas, where Arkansas doesn't have their quarterback and their top running back for the entire fourth quarter. They blow a 14 to, I think it was like a 14 to 10, 14 to 11 lead. So they just can't like that stuff can't happen if you're. That just stuff can't happen if you're like a playoff caliber team like Tennessee.
Yeah, it's going to be panic time for the team that loses that game. Today's episode of LSU Sports Insider is brought to you by Classic Industrial Services, proudly serving Louisiana and the entire United States with metal siding and roofing, steam and electric tracing systems, industrial and commercial coatings, refractory services, and general maintenance services. From large capital projects to commercial projects or your smaller quick response needs, Classic Industrial is your go-to for quality and safety. They're not just about business, they're a proud community partner, supporting local initiatives and helping build a stronger Baton Rouge. Because at Classic Industrial Services, every minute matters. Okay, guys, back to LSU Arkansas. Let's wrap this up. Let's do some keys to the game. Keys to the Game is proudly sponsored by Associated Grocers. Join our team and support the success of local independent retail grocers. Apply today for available positions at Associated Grocers. What does LSU need to do to run this winning streak to 6 and keep themselves in the college football playoff race, SEC title race, all of those things? Scott Rabalais.
Arkansas wants to muddy this game up, right? They want a game probably in the teens or something similar to the Tennessee game, right? LSU's got to be Garrett Nussmeister's got to be a little more proficient on offense. He was below 50% passing, made the huge passes when he had to against Ole Miss, but they got to be clicking a little more on offense. Getting C.J. Daniels back would help. We can see what Trey Green would do, and like we said, they got to run the ball more. Defensively, you assume Green is going to play quarterback. They got to be disruptive, continue to be disruptive on defense. This is a big advantage for LSU. LSU is 4th in the country in sacks and 25th in tackles for loss. Arkansas is 87th in sacks allowed and 108th in tackles for loss allowed. So that says that Arkansas is going to make some big plays against LSU, and LSU is going to get in the backfield, and Braden Swinson, and Savion Jones, and some of these other guys are going to sack Green and bring down some runners for tackles for loss, and maybe force some turnovers. So they've got to continue to be that disruptive defense that they've grown into under Blake Baker, and if they do, I think they can pull out a close win.
I think being disciplined in your rush lanes from a pass rushing sense, because you want to get after the quarterback when you absolutely have that opportunity, but you also don't want to get out of your rushing lane and let him escape and use his legs to either extend plays through the air or escape a muddy pocket and run for 10 yards and a first down, right? So I think that's going to be that's a more specific key to the game, but I do think that's something that you have to keep an eye out for at a game like this against a quarterback that's this mobile and loves to make as many big plays as this. And I also think just stopping the run is going to be important in this game. Like if you force Taylor Green in behind the sticks. He might make a spectacular play here and there, but it's going to be very hard for him to make spectacular plays when he's stuck in 3rd and 8 all the time.
He also might make a huge mistake.
Exactly. He's more prone
too.
to make a big mistake in those sort of situations where they have to get 8 or 9 or 10 yards. So I think that's going to be very important for LSU on defense, just keeping Arkansas behind the sticks. And then offensively, it's the opposite of that. It's, staying in front of the sticks. It's, just being much more efficient on early downs, whether it's running the ball or getting it out to their receivers. And obviously pass protection is going to be important in this game, as it is in every game, and just sort of keeping Landon Jackson not involved, not letting him disrupt the game in any sort of way, whether it's sacks or pressures or whatnot. Keep in mind, I think all that stuff's going to be pretty important, because I think LSU has the advantage when it comes to their receivers against Arkansas secondary.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the point here, is that, like, okay, we could be cliche and say turnovers are the key to any football game, but specifically in this case, I think Garrett Nussmeier still has that kind of gunslinger in him sometimes, where he wants to try to make the big play, squeeze the ball in. Against Ole Miss, you had to do that because you needed the big plays to win the game, and so you'll forgive an interception. But I think back to like South Alabama, where he's needlessly pushing the ball into windows they didn't need to go. I think LSU is the better team down to down. Don't do that. Don't make the mistake. Throw the ball away, punt it. Go play defense and get it back again and try again. Like, I just think a more conservative game plan probably would feed into LSU success in this game. And I'm not, like Jim Derry, who hosts our Datitude podcast, he'd laugh about that, because he's always the one saying I'm too crazy with game plans and 4th down decisions and things like that. I actually think LSU could benefit from that in this game. Don't let Arkansas make this game crazy.
Yeah, let Arkansas make this game crazy. When I say that, have them turn over the ball and have
let them be the ones who are making desperation throws and things like that.
Yeah.
And sending all out blitzes and that sort of thing. So those are our keys to the game. Tiger fans, Associated Grocers is hiring. Join a team committed to the success of independent retail grocers. Apply today at Associated Grocers and be part of something great. Okay, that leaves us with predictions. This is the LSU Sports Insider podcast. It's brought to you by Waste Pro, LSU Arkansas. Who wins in Fayetteville, Scott?
I will start by saying I was the only one who picked LSU to win last week, and I picked them to win by 3.
Give your flower, yeah.
I picked them to win 27-24, and it was 29-26. It's not too bad.
Amelia didn't bring cookies, but if she did, you get first pick.
There's cookies out in the newsroom, so that's good. I picked LSU. Look, this game has been decided by 3 points one way or another the last 4 years. I think I'd be kind of silly not to. I'm a fan of history. I'd be silly not to pick a 3-point game here again. I'll pick LSU to win 23-20. A little more high scoring than Arkansas would like. I really think Arkansas would love 17-14 or something like that. But LSU mounts just enough drives. He said, "Don't give Arkansas the short field, right? Yeah, with a silly interception, Garrett. Don't do that. Don't put them at the LSU 27-yard line or something like that. You're just begging for trouble. They avoid those silly penalties, force Arkansas into making more of the mistakes. I think they win the game."
Koki?
Yeah, I have LSU winning 31-24. I think LSU's defense is definitely going to give up some big plays in this game. They're always due for a few, but I just think Arkansas is so turnover prone that it's really hard to trust them in a situation like this, even if they're at home, and even in this big of a situation. And I just always have trouble picking against LSU in games like this where they're, I guess, quote unquote, the more talented team, because Brian Kelly's history in situations like this means that he's going to win almost every single time. And for that reason, and some of the advantages they have, I guess, on arguably both sides of the ball, I'm picking LSU. But in a close game, and part of it's because of the environment, part of it's because of the ceiling of Arkansas, which I think is really, really high.
Yep. And by the way, we want you to leave your comment with your prediction for this game. So go ahead and do that. In the comments, subscribe to the LSU Sports at NOLA.com YouTube channel. I really didn't want this to be a clean sweep. I think our USC preview show, we had a clean sweep, and then USC beat LSU. And so we look, just LSU homers. But I'm with you, Koki, and you, Rab. Brian Kelly has been in this situation before. Normally you'd say trap game, perfect spot to pick Arkansas, the home underdog. The fans are going to be juiced up. They think this could end up being a pretty special season in Fayetteville. And listen, if they win this game, it definitely could be. Like, I'm not saying they're going to make the playoff or anything, but you could see like a 9-3 season for Arkansas if they could find a way to win this game. And that would be remembered in Fayetteville for quite a long time. It's their best season in years. So it's a big game for the home team. LSU has to treat it like a big game. But Brian Kelly's been in that spot, and I think he's at least in a situation where he's going to have his team's attention this week. And if it comes down to it, they're going to make the plays at the end. So I've got LSU winning 30-28. Do have Arkansas covering the spread, but it is a clean sweep for us on LSU. So that's going to do it for our show today. Thanks to Scott Rabalais and Koki Riley. Scott, you'll be in Fayetteville on Saturday. We'll have a post-game show for you on these same channels. Our producer today was Alex Lee. Our thanks to her. And I'm Zach Ewing. Thanks for watching the LSU Sports Insider.